제정을 막아 우리 아이들의 마음을 지켜주십시오.
We are ending up now, you'll see, we're not, there's a... Well, I think to call you the United Kingdom, Great Britain, a Christian country, yes, we have an incredible Christian heritage. Yes, the Bible was rooted at the heart of our education systems, health systems, parliamentary systems, legal systems. Yes, and that has meant that we have, as a nation, had great peace and prosperity and been viewed across the world for our systems. But look at where we are today. We are in political and parliamentary chaos. Why? Because we have the shell of Christianity, but not the life of Christianity. Because we have said, we've enjoyed the fruits of Christianity and then said, but we're going to do it our way now. Our way, which has meant we throw out God. And in the throwing out of God, we are ending up now, you'll see, there's a lot of instability in the United Kingdom. Civil partnerships was meant to be something in 2004, was meant to be something that was civil in nature. It was never meant to be sacramental in nature. It was never meant to reflect marriage. But we knew that as soon as it was passed in law, everyone started calling it gay marriage. And within 10 years, we had gay marriage.
전 세계에 복음을 전했던 영국의 기독교, 결국 포괄적 차별금지법으로 무너져 내리고 말았습니다. 그렇다면 차별금지법이 법으로 통과된 나라의 기독교는 어떤 상황을 맞이하고 있을까요?
That's right. That's right. The same thing that they're trying to do on the other side of the park. No. Don't take my bike to big homes. Don't take my bike to big. Don't take my bike.
We have represented 200 street preachers in the past 10 years, 200 street preachers who have been arrested or asked to move on the streets at the Christian Legal Centre. We love, people should be free to say even the disagreeable. That's a fundamental point of free speech. And we know that the gospel is an offence to many. You know what's ironic is that many Christians say to me, why do you defend those street preachers? Really, the way that they are on the streets, they're really... And I'm saying because this is first of all, they come for the street preachers. Well, I think to call you the United Kingdom, Great Britain, a Christian country, yes, we have an incredible Christian heritage. Yes, the Bible was rooted at the heart of our education systems, health systems, parliamentary systems, legal systems. Yes, and that has meant that we have, as a nation, had great peace and prosperity and been viewed across the world for our systems. But look at where we are today. We are in political and parliamentary chaos. Why? Because we have the shell of Christianity, but not the life of Christianity. Because we have said, we've enjoyed the fruits of Christianity and then said, but we're going to do it our way now. Our way, which has meant we throw out God. And in the throwing out of God, we are ending up now, you'll see, there's a lot of instability in the United Kingdom. Civil partnerships was meant to be something in 2004, was meant to be something that was civil in nature. It was never meant to be sacramental in nature. It was never meant to reflect marriage. But we knew that as soon as it was passed in law, everyone started calling it gay marriage. And within 10 years, we had gay marriage.
전 세계에 복음을 전했던 영국의 기독교, 결국 포괄적 차별금지법으로 무너져 내리고 말았습니다. 그렇다면 차별금지법이 법으로 통과된 나라의 기독교는 어떤 상황을 맞이하고 있을까요?
That's right. That's right. The same thing that they're trying to do on the other side of the park. No. Don't take my bike to the big box. Don't take my bike to the big. Don't take my bike.
Sit down. Everybody. We have represented 200 street preachers in the past 10 years. 200 street preachers who have been arrested or asked to move on the streets at the Christian Legal Centre. We love people should be free to say even the disagreeable. That's a fundamental point of free speech. And we know that the gospel is an offence to many. You know what's ironic is that many Christians say to me, why do you defend those street preachers? Really, the way that they are on the streets, they're really... And I'm saying because this is first of all, they come for the street preachers. Well, I think to call the United Kingdom, Great Britain, a Christian country, yes, we have an incredible Christian heritage. Yes, the Bible was rooted at the heart of our education systems, health systems, parliamentary systems, legal systems. Yes, and that has meant that we have, as a nation, had great peace and prosperity and been viewed across the world for our systems. But look at where we are today. We are in political and parliamentary chaos. Why? Because we have the shell of Christianity, but not the life of Christianity. Because we have said, we've enjoyed the fruits of Christianity and then said, but we're going to do it our way now. Our way, which has meant we throw out God. And in the throwing out of God, we are ending up now, you'll see, there's a lot of instability in the United Kingdom. Civil partnerships was meant to be something in 2004, was meant to be something that was civil in nature. It was never meant to be sacramental in nature. It was never meant to reflect marriage. But we knew that as soon as it was passed in law, everyone started calling it gay marriage. And within 10 years, we had gay marriage.
전 세계에 복음을 전했던 영국의 기독교, 결국 포괄적 차별금지법으로 무너져 내리고 말았습니다. 그렇다면 차별금지법이 법으로 통과된 나라의 기독교는 어떤 상황을 맞이하고 있을까요?
That's right. That's right. The same thing that they're trying to do on the other side of the to read. Don't take my Bible.
Sit down. Everybody. We have represented 200 street preachers in the past 10 years. 200 street preachers who have been arrested or asked to move on the streets at the Christian Legal Centre. We love people should be free to say even the disagreeable. That's a fundamental point of free speech. And we know that the gospel is an offence to many. You know what's ironic is that many Christians say to me, why do you defend those street preachers? Really, the way that they are on the streets, they're really... And I'm saying because this is the... First of all, they come for the street preachers. Well, I think to call you the United Kingdom, Great Britain, a Christian country, yes, we have an incredible Christian heritage. Yes, the Bible was rooted at the heart of our education systems, health systems, parliamentary systems, legal systems. Yes, and that has meant that we have, as a nation, had great peace and prosperity and been viewed across the world for our systems. But look at where we are today. We are in political and parliamentary chaos. Why? Because we have the shell of Christianity, but not the life of Christianity. Because we have said, we've enjoyed the fruits of Christianity and then said, but we're going to do it our way now. Our way, which has meant we throw out God. And in the throwing out of God, we are ending up now, you'll see, there's a lot of instability in the United Kingdom. Civil partnerships was meant to be something in 2004, was meant to be something that was civil in nature. It was never meant to be sacramental in nature. It was never meant to reflect marriage. But we knew that as soon as it was passed in law, everyone started calling it gay marriage. And within 10 years, we had gay marriage.
전 세계에 복음을 전했던 영국의 기독교, 결국 포괄적 차별금지법으로 무너져 내리고 말았습니다. 그렇다면 차별금지법이 법으로 통과된 나라의 기독교는 어떤 상황을 맞이하고 있을까요?
Suffering violence.
That's right.
All I've done tonight.
That's right.
Is to give news of Christ. The same thing that they're trying to do on the other side of the park. Don't take my Bible to read. Don't take my Bible.
안녕하세요. 전국에서 그리고 해외에서 차바를 실시간으로 그리고 함께하고 계시는 우리 한국교회 성도 여러분들 참으로 감사하고 환영합니다. 저는 차바 운영위원으로 섬기고 있는 김윤숙 목사라고 합니다. 차바가 이렇게 시즌 1에 끝나는 것도 아니고 시즌 2에 계속되어지면서 특별히 이번 시즌 2에는 한국 강사뿐 아니라 해외에 계신 한국 우리 목사님들 그리고 또한 우리 외국 강사님들이 함께 해주셔서 참으로 풍성하고 감사한 생각이 드는데요. 이렇게 차별금지법이 제정되기 이전에 그 위험성을 알리고 함께 연대하여서 우리가 깨어나고 그리고 이렇게 정말 우리가 서로를 알리고 공부하고 준비하며 우리가 함께 할 수 있는 그러한 나라가 저는 많지 않을 거라고 생각해요. 그런데 이렇게 차바가 우리 한국교회가 연대하여서 그리고 또 많은 분들이 함께 수고해 줌으로써 매주마다 강의가 진행될 수 있는 것을 참으로 하나님께 감사를 드리고 또 함께 호응해 주시는 각지에 계시는 모든 분들께 참으로 감사를 드립니다. 느헤미야가 같이 그 이스라엘 백성들과 성벽을 하나하나 벽돌 하나하나를 쌓았듯이 제가 생각할 때 우리의 그 매주마다의 발걸음들이 한 걸음 한 걸음씩 그렇게 벽돌을 쌓으면서 대한민국 가운데 거룩한 방파제, 하나님의 거룩한 도성, 하나님의 거룩한 그러한 나라를 만들기 위해서 우리가 매주 수고한다고 저는 믿고 있습니다. 그래서 하나님께서 은혜를 더해 주실 거라고 생각하고 오늘도 제 3번째 시간을 강의를 함께 가도록 하겠는데요. 먼저 지난주에는 우리 이재훈 목사님께서 온누리 교회를 섬기고 계시는 이재훈 목사님께서 저에게 오셔서 C.S. 루이스의 신전한 기독교에서 본 차별금지법이라는 강의로 함께 해주셨는데요. 아주 내용을 흥미롭고도 쉽게 저에게 잘 설명해 주셨습니다. 그래서 지난주에 굉장히 많은 호응을 얻었고 또 특별히 육천 온누리 교회에서도 정말 많은 분들이 함께 시청해 주셨고 각 채널에서 많은 분들이 함께 영상을 듣고 공부해 주셨는데요. 혹시 빠뜨리시고 못 보신 분들이 계신다면 다시 한번 찾아서 그것을 꼭 시청해 주시고 그리고 이렇게 한국교회가 함께 해주시고 또 목사님들이 함께 해주신다는 것에 대해서 참으로 감사를 드리면서 우리가 각자의 위치에서 거룩한 대한민국을 만들기 위해서 지속적으로 우리가 쉬지 않고 함께 응원하고 그리고 동참했으면 좋겠습니다. 제가 그러면 오늘 저희에게 강의를 전달해 주실 그 강사분을 소개하겠는데요. 오늘 강사분은 코로나가 아니었다면 아마 함께 해주셨을 텐데 한국에 이미 여러 번 와주셨고 그리고 우리에게 참으로 사금법의 위험성에 대해서 선지자처럼 그리고 정말 우리에게 나팔을 불어주신 참으로 귀한 분이십니다. 많은 분들이 이미 알고 계실 거라고 생각하는데요. 영국 크리스천 컨설 거기에 대표로 계시는 안드레아 윌리엄스 우리 강사님이신데요. 오늘은 동영상으로 전달된 강의를 저희가 함께 시청하여서 보도록 하겠는데요. 안드레아 윌리엄스 하면 제가 여러 이렇게 외국 강사분들을 보았지만 정말 그분을 먼저 보면은 이분은 변호사로서 그리고 정말 하나님의 정의를 사회 가운데 어떻게 실천하며 행동하는 그리스도인으로서 살아갈 수 있는지에 대해서 우리에게 살아있는 그런 신뢰 그리고 모범으로서 보여주는 분이라고 생각합니다. 그런데 이분이 개인적으로 만나서 보면 참으로 따뜻하고 엄마와 같고 정말 사랑이 풍성하셔서 그 4자녀의 어머니이신데 모든 사람을 대할 때마다 작은 자라도 정말 그 영혼을 사랑하는 것이 느껴지고 또 무엇보다도 하나님을 사랑하기 때문에 자신의 몸을 불사르면서 변호사와 그리고 엄마, 주부로서 바쁜 가운데도 이렇게 귀한 일을 하고 계시는 분이십니다. 안드레아는 어떻게 보면 영국에서 홀로 그 외로운 싸움을 해오셨고 지금도 하고 계시는데 영국의 BBC 방송이나 여러 이 방송 채널에서도 우리를 대표하여 그리고 영국에서 영국의 하나님의 자녀를 대표하여서 그분이 성경적인 가치관을 오늘날에도 많은 분들에게 호소하고 알리고 쌓아내고 계신 분입니다. 그래서 이렇게 안드레아 윌리엄스의 강의를 들을 수 있다는 것이 정말 참으로 감사한 일 같습니다. 2020년 저희를 위해서 특별히 또 차별금지법, 이 차바 로고까지 이렇게 달라고 하셔서 정말 성의를 다하여서 저에게 한 50분 정도의 강의를 보내주셨는데요. 이 강의가 사실은 또 번역되는 굉장한 많은 수고가 들어갑니다. 우리 전윤성 변호사님께서 그 강의 번역을 함께 검수해 주시면서 수고해 주셨고요. 많은 분들이 이것이 이루어질 수 있도록 함께 기도해 주시고 수고해 주셨는데요. 그래서 오늘 여러분들 이 강의를 오늘 들으실 때 자막을 읽으시기에 약간 어려우실 수 있으나 읽으실 때 여러분이 동영상을 보시면서 강의를 들으시면서 우리 안드레아 윌리엄스 속에 있는 하나님 나라를 향한 열정, 그리고 성경적 가치관을 수호하기를 원하는 그 하나님의 군사로서의 열정이 우리 각 사람에게 전이되어지고 전달되어지기를 원합니다. 그리하여 정말 안드레아가 절규하고 정말 저에게 부탁했어요. 한국교회는 연합하여, 교회가 연합하고 각 영역이 연합하고 그리고 각 세대가 연합하여서 정말 하나님의 그 가치를 이 땅 가운데 가져오고 그리고 한국교회는 마지막 시대에 한국교회의 부르심을 다하고 사명을 다하는 그러한 정말 거룩한 나라가 되어달라고 부탁했는데요. 2020년 따끈따끈하게 도착하는 영상을 강의를 들으시면서 우리 모두의 심령 가운데 그러한 안드레아의 그러한 그 열정들이 열매 맺어지고 또한 은혜가 되어지고 도전이 되어지는 시간이 되기를 여러분 기대합니다. 그러면 우리 함께 강의 함께 살펴보도록 하겠습니다.
Hello, I'm Andrea Williams, Chief Executive of Christian Concern and the Christian Legal Centre. It is always my great joy to speak to the people of South Korea. I only wish that I could be with you in these strange and unique times in our world at the moment. My subject today is anti-discrimination laws in the United Kingdom, and I hope that by speaking to the anti-discrimination laws in the United Kingdom, we can teach a lesson to you in South Korea for what happens when they are implemented, the trajectory, and how important it is for those of you that are Christians, and those of you that are
죄송합니다. 송출하는데 약간의 테크니컬한 문제가 있었기 때문에 저희가 처음부터 다시 재생해서 틀도록 하겠습니다. 양해 부탁드립니다.
Hello, I'm Andrea Williams, Chief Executive of Christian Concern and the Christian Legal Centre. It is always my great joy to speak to the people of South Korea. I only wish that I could be with you in these strange and unique times in our world at the moment. My subject today is anti-discrimination laws in the United Kingdom, and I hope that by speaking to the anti-discrimination laws in the United Kingdom, we can teach a lesson to you in South Korea for what happens when they are implemented, the trajectory, and how important it is for those of you that are Christians, those of you that are lawyers, those of you that are teachers, pastors, those of you that are society leaders, that you will understand their nature, you will understand what happens and why it is so important to tackle them for the good of society. So I thank you for your kind invitation to speak to you today. It's worth, first of all, noting that anti-discrimination is not an issue that exists in a vacuum. There are numerous root causes that create a culture that lead to the kind of tribalism and identity policies that are at the heart of the equality agenda that we see so clearly in the West and which is coming to you in South Korea. I call it an equality agenda because anti-discrimination law has very little to do with equality and a lot to do with politics. That's why it's important that the politicians, the lawyers, the educators understand very clearly what it is that I'm saying, and also the pastors. At its heart, anti-discrimination defines people by various minority characteristics and focuses on our differences rather than our similarities. Instead of bringing people together in the shared understanding that we are born into the radical equality and the shared dignity of being created in God's image. And that is something that we in Britain have enjoyed historically in our laws. But today that has gone through the equality agenda. And this agenda breeds suspicion among people and the belief that because of their differences, they tend to be victimised by this society more than others. Being a victim, in turn, can breed contempt for those that others view as their victimisers. As we have seen time and time again in the United Kingdom, anti-discrimination law pushes people to fighting for their perceived individual rights to be more equal than others. The philosophy underpinning the anti-discrimination agenda has led to such things as critical race theory, which has bred movements like Black Lives Matter and spawned protests which often become violent in the United States. It has led to an insidious form of cultural Marxism, where our entire history and culture is treated with suspicion and disdain, with an aim to fully dismantling it. So today, in Britain, much of British history is unknown and not properly analysed, and the way that it is taught in the academies and the way that it is spoken of in political life and even in our education in schools is with disdain. The so-called Christian heritage is one to be ashamed of, not celebrating for the good that it has done. This philosophy has led to a transgender theory today where biological sex no longer matters. It's subjective feeling that counts. I can be whatever gender I aspire to be or no gender at all. It is a war of nature and ultimately of God's sovereignty and the creation order. This philosophy has also created the LGBTQI movement, which has for the past 30 years in society sought to deconstruct heteronormativity to thereby redefine the family, in fact, to smash the family, and to end what they believe to be straight privilege. Perhaps the greatest challenge of the anti-discrimination agenda is that it is all-encompassing. It usually starts in the area of employment or housing, and then it expands to the provision of goods and services. However, where the agenda is most advanced, like in the United Kingdom, it then tries to take over how we educate our children, how we run our churches and define our beliefs. And it even tries to censor our speech and challenge the very beliefs that we hold as Christians, suggesting that they are not worthy of respect in a democratic society. Suggesting that they are not worthy of respect in a society based on equality considerations. The result has been the mainstreaming of anti-Christian bias and anti-Christian discrimination into the cultural fabric of the United Kingdom. And this is why it's really important for all public leaders, including pastors, to understand that this is a gospel issue. It cannot be left to politicians, it cannot be left to lawyers, it cannot be left to educators, it cannot be left to government. It is something that is firmly needs to be dealt with within the church and within the church's people. Anti-Christian bias is a predisposition against an individual or a group wholly or partly due to their Christian beliefs or practices. Who would have thought that this could possibly happen in the United Kingdom? Well, it has. Who would think today that it could possibly happen in South Korea? Well, it could. So, anti-Christian bias first includes stereotyping Christians in a negative fashion, or representing Christian beliefs as oppressive, or backwards, or irrational, or hateful. It deals with mainstreaming the equality agenda, so mainstream and applauding and celebrating gay icon figures. And any that don't celebrate but continue to speak Christian orthodoxy on the subject are vilified as hateful and backward and irrational and not with the times. This also includes individuals, employers, organisations and even government actors going out of their way to respect the demands of other faiths or beliefs, but not of Christians. The bias against Christians is rarely, if ever, challenged by the political or media class in the United Kingdom and in the West. It's become one of the few acceptable prejudices in the United Kingdom that it has become culturally acceptable. Anti-Christian discrimination is discrimination against a person or a group of people wholly or partly due to their Christian beliefs or practices. This would include discrimination against someone because of his or her beliefs about marriage, life, the unborn children, or sexual ethics. It would also include discrimination against someone because they have a conscientious objection to sensitive moral matters such as abortion or compelled use of transgender programs. One of the chief problems facing Christians in the United Kingdom today, especially those who faithfully adhere to biblical belief, is the shocking level of religious illiteracy in our culture. For more than 2 decades, both the media and the LGBT campaigning groups have hammered it into the collective consciousness that any opposition to any campaigning goal of the LGBT community or to homosexual behaviour itself is hateful, homophobic, small-minded. Biblical Christian belief during this period has been attacked ruthlessly along these same lines. That is why it's vital that the churches and that Christians in public life speak lovingly but strongly and clearly and in truth into the public arena at this time, at the very beginning that these laws begin to take shape and place in the society of South Korea. In our nation, the Christian voices that have dissented have been very few. Churches have far too often not defended biblical belief, but have instead gone quiet on it, sought to be loving and caring, sought to say very clearly, we are places of welcome, we do not judge, which of course is true, but then not to say anything about the truth of God's moral code. They've gone on the defence to prove that they're not the type of Christian who would be an enemy of homosexuality. This is why in South Korea it is vital that we talk about the truth when it comes to sexual ethics from the get-go of this anti-discrimination legislation. Today, I will focus mainly on the two protected characteristics in the United Kingdom that equality law has posed and imposed and presents as the greatest existential threat to the free exercise of Christian faith in our nation. Those two protected characteristics are sexual orientation and gender reassignment. Let us first turn to the issue of sexual orientation. One of the chief problems that exists in defining what legal protections should be afforded to sexual orientation is a hermeneutical one. It's an understanding of what is meant. Put succinctly, the problem began, and I want the South Koreans to really hear this well, because of the lack of legal clarity in how sexual orientation is defined. Please don't make this same mistake at the outset in South Korea. When the Equality Framework Directive 2000 was being drafted, which would later create a legal obligation upon all European Union member states to adopt their own in-kind anti-discrimination legislation, it originally stated this, that with regard to sexual orientation, a clear dividing line should be drawn between sexual orientation, which is covered by this proposal, and sexual behaviour, which is not. Now, this clarifying statement never made it into the final binding directive. And so the confusion of whether sexual practice was included in sexual orientation has been inherited by the member states. What this means is that sexual orientation and sexual behaviour now becomes one. First of all, the notion of sexual orientation in the first place, that somebody is innately born gay, there's an issue with this, but now it in and of itself expands to mean protection over sexual behaviours so that they cannot be critiqued. The British Parliament has failed to cure this lack of legal certainty. So I think that what's important in South Korea is for you to understand this. When there is an anti-discrimination protection around sexual orientation, it means sexual practice. It means the celebration, the full protection, the promotion of homosexual ideology, fully blown homosexual relationships in society and the promotion of them. And so, as a minimum, this needs to be made clear from the start so that you can ensure conscience objections within the legislation. Or you need to say that sexual orientation does not extend to sexual behaviour. This, of course, already cedes the notion of sexual orientation, which may well, in and of itself, also be a difficult thing. Parliament had opportunity to cure this at various points, but it never did, because the lack of clarity in law can be useful. When defining sexual orientation in Section 2 of the Employment Equality Sexual Orientation Regulations of 2003, it simply used the circular definition that sexual orientation means one's sexual orientation towards persons of the same sex, persons of the opposite sex, or persons of the same sex or opposite sex. A nearly identical definition continues to be used to this day through the Equality Act of 2010. This confusion is compounded because sexual orientation can mean many different things depending on who is defining it. For some, it means sexual attraction. For others, it means their behaviour as well. This is particularly problematic because it suggests that moral opposition to sexual behaviour is somehow discriminatory. Others wish to include it as a worldview. This category of people suggests that any opposition to the LGBT campaigning points includes same-sex marriage, same-sex adoption, and LGBT education of our children is homophobic and should be prohibited by anti-discrimination law. Let's turn to this latter category of people first. If you take away anything from today's talk, let it be this. Being homosexual and LGBT campaigning are not synonymous. Being homosexual is about how you live out your life. LGBT campaigning is about political activism and worldview. Not all people who choose to be homosexual are LGBT campaigners, and not all LGBT activists are homosexual. Presently, universities across the country offer courses in gay and lesbian studies where things such as ethics, queer philosophy, political science, sexology and the social construction of sexual identity are discussed. The outworking of these ideological positions has been mainstreamed into both education and culture. The entire premise, for example, behind the mandatory LGBT education of children in the United Kingdom is that it seeks to deconstruct heterosexual normativity. And this has led to some LGBTQ academics calling for the queering up of the primary school classroom. Precisely stated, LGBT activism is very real, it can be ideological, and at times aggressively so. So successful has the LGBT lobby been that even the simple premise that a child does better growing up with a mother and a father in a low-conflict home environment has been deemed homophobic and enough to disqualify someone from holding public office. Next week, here at Christian Concern, you will be hearing about the case of Richard Page. If ever there was a symbol for how badly the anti-discrimination agenda has failed Christians and what an existential threat it poses to religious freedom, then Richard is that symbol, and one that will occur in South Korea unless you hold back this anti-discrimination tide at the very beginning. Richard Page is a devout Christian who's always been active in the community. He performed exemplary service as a lay magistrate in Kent for 15 years, frequently presiding over adoption cases. He has served as a highly capable and popular non-executive director with the National Health Trust in our hospitals. In 2014, a social services was circulated among the magistrate judges, making sweeping statements about how new research findings suggested that an adopted child fares best when placed with same-sex couples, as opposed to being placed with a mother and father. Richard disagreed with the report when it was presented to him in one of the adoption cases that he had to decide on. He said to two other magistrates behind closed doors that his first and foremost responsibility was to rule for an outcome that was in the best interests of the child. In this particular circumstance, the child had lived for 3 years with a married mother and father. 2 gay men wanted to adopt the child, and Richard said that the child would do best to stay with a married mother and father. He also said that he believed that the social science showed that children do best with a married mum and father, and wanted to bring evidence to show a different viewpoint from the report that he was being presented with. He said that this belief also flowed from his belief as faith as a Christian, that he too had practiced as a foster carer with children from broken and difficult homes. Richard and his wife have fostered several children for many years, so he is also able to draw upon his direct experience. Although this conversation was in the judge's retiring room and was personal reflections, and although the child was placed with that same-sex couple, Richard Page's comments were secretly reported to the judicial disciplinary process. By 2015, even though Richard had been subject to disciplinary meetings and equality and diversity training in order to re-educate him, he was suspended from the magistracy, from the judge's bench, pending investigation. The outcome of the investigation was that he had allowed his religious beliefs to affect his judicial decision-making, that he had been biased. So holding the belief as a Christian that children do best with a mother and father was deemed to be discriminatory, and that he should have removed himself from the case. You can imagine that the story of a magistrate being punished simply for suggesting that a child does best with a mother and father attracted a lot of media and public attention. Many people in the United Kingdom, not just Christians, feel the same way. The best available social science, psychology and anthropological evidence attest to the truth of Richard's statement. More than that, members of the judiciary, even the President of the Supreme Court and former head of the Family Division, frequently appear in the media here in the UK to express their views on such boldly contested issues. But they do so without punishment and are often celebrated for their desire to liberalise the law. This was not the case with Richard. By expressing a biblical truth, one which can also be evidenced through secular argument, Richard was removed from office. Just as egregious, the National Health Service also dismissed him from his position, even though his portfolio in the National Health Service had nothing to do with parenting issues or public policy. It was to do with finance. The National Health Service suggested that even allowing Richard to continue in his position might mean that LGBT people would be scared of seeking medical help if they were ill. This statement alone shocks the conscience. The idea that a Christian in a non-medical role who never sees patients could dissuade a sick person from getting medical treatment simply for believing a child does better with a mum and dad would be laughable, if not for the fact that a good man has lost his job and his reputation as a result of this type of thinking. The problem of how sexual orientation laws have ravaged religious freedom doesn't stop there. Let's start with a brief piece of history. In 2007, the UK adopted the Sexual Orientation Regulations, the predecessor of the Equality Act of 2010. In 2007, the same year the regulations were adopted, so bear this in mind if you are adopting anti-discrimination legislation, there were 14 Christian adoption agencies in the UK, 11 Catholic adoption agencies in England and Wales, 2 Roman Catholic adoption agencies in Scotland, and 1 evangelical adoption agency in England and Wales. As a result of the sexual orientation regulations, all 14 agencies suffered severe repercussions. Of those 14, several of which have existed for hundreds of years or more and were credited with placing the most difficult children into families, 11 of them were forced to remove their Christian ethos and become secular sounding agencies, or they would go out of business completely. To put this into perspective, the 2 Catholic agencies in Scotland accounted on average for 20% of the adoptions in Scotland each year. Of the 11 Catholic adoption agencies in England and Wales, they performed 1/3 of all private adoptions in the United Kingdom. Before closing its doors to business, the Westminster Catholic Children's Society alone provided services to more than 3,000 children. While we lament the loss of ethos-based adoption agencies because of gender politics, what is equally deplorable is that in the name of so-called sexual orientation, countless children will stay in orphanages or inadequate foster care because of the loss of these adoption agencies. Or we can look to the case of Gary McFarlane. He is a relationships counsellor. He was terminated from his position with Relate Counselling Service for gross misconduct, for merely asking if he could be accommodated in his Christian beliefs on biblical sexuality. He merely inquired about the possibility of not being required to give sex therapy to 2 men or 2 women that he might counsel. Gross misconduct is the harshest penalty available to an employer, and they suspended Gary and then dismissed him for gross misconduct for raising the possibility that he might have a conscience issue with giving sex therapy to 2 men or 2 women. There weren't even actual clients. He had an incredible record of counselling. People loved him. So his employment was terminated. His ability to be registered, his ability to get insurance, all came under the spotlight. Life became very difficult for him. Another case, Eunice and Owen Johns, long-time foster carers and devoted Christians. After having taken a break from fostering for a few years, they were then required to go through a new screening process, which of course is understandable with the local authority. Despite their long history of helping children in the most difficult of situations, Eunice and Owen John were rejected as foster parents because they were asked about their views on homosexuality and whether or not they would be able to encourage a child if they were expressing confusion or feelings of being gay. Please bear in mind that the age of the children that Eunice and Owen Johns were adopting was 6 and 7, and they were being asked to promote homosexuality to children in their care. During the trial, the taxpayer-funded Equality and Human Rights Commission condemned Mr. and Mrs. Johns, saying that allowing such people to foster children ran the risk of infecting the children with Christianity. It's a little bit like speaking of Christianity like it's coronavirus, some dangerous disease, some deadly disease which isn't fit to be in the public space. What was also extraordinary during this whole process, they wouldn't encourage homosexuality in children, so they weren't deemed fit to be foster carers or adoptive carers. But also, the adoption agency, the local authority felt that their church and the fact they had a lot of people home on a Sunday for Sunday lunch, that this was dangerous for children. To be in that kind of environment every Sunday would be a dangerous environment for the children. Slowly, however, here at the Christian Legal Centre, and we've been going for a long time, ground is being won back by Christians. And one of the most well-known cases at the Christian Legal Centre is that of Felix Ngole. Felix is a Christian student who was removed from his master's degree in social work at the University of Sheffield after he made comments on his personal Facebook page in support of biblical teaching on marriage and sexual ethics. Felix was originally suspended and then removed from his course because he was told that he may have caused offence to some individuals and transgressed boundaries which are not deemed appropriate for someone entering the social work profession. I would suggest that the case represented an egregious incident of viewpoint discrimination whereby Felix was discriminated not for the subject matter being addressed, but for the side that he took in the debate. The case highlights the reality that some universities are seeking to create a bar to certain professions. Unless you think straight, unless you get with the LGBTQI anti-discrimination agenda, you're not fit to be a social worker, you're not fit to be a teacher, you're not fit to be a politician. The case highlights that this is the case. Counsel for the University of Sheffield, Sarah Hannett of Matrix Chambers, one of the most famous barristers' chambers in the country, told the court that the university's policy is not just that the services must be provided without discrimination, but that they must be seen to be provided, that they must be provided without perception of discrimination. And that required the removal of Mr. Ngole from the course. So a Christian with orthodox views on marriage, if that is perceived as someone who discriminates, should not be a social worker, should not be a counsellor, should not be a teacher. Sarah Hannett denied that there was a nexus, a connection between the sharing of his opinion on biblical marriage and his Christian faith. She then went on to argue that in fact Felix was not removed for what he said, but because of the way in which he said it, which was in fact quoting from the Bible. The reality, of course, is that this is a distinction without a difference. The genuineness of his argument also smacks of dubiousness, as no students from the University of Sheffield have used their Facebook pages to promote social views which the university agrees with, including on issues involving LGBTQI issues, have ever been punished. The High Court found against Felix and the case was appealed. Before the Court of Appeal, counsel for the University of Sheffield, Sarah Hannett, went so far as to say that even Mother Teresa of Calcutta would be barred from social work if she had expressed her views about homosexuality. She argued that even speaking against same-sex marriage in a Bible study should be enough to exclude you from a social work profession. In a sense, she went too far, because on that day in that court, reason won the day, and the Court of Appeal overturned the lower court's earlier ruling, making it clear that the expressing of a Christian opinion is wholly different from engaging in an act of discrimination. The court said Felix had never discriminated against a service user, nor was there any indication that he ever would. Let me just say that this is also the case for Eunice and Owen Johns. They have provided the best situation for their children, nor is this the case for Gary McFarlane, who was the best kind of counsellor. This case stands for the fundamental principle that the Christians enjoy the same freedoms to express their opinions as everyone else in the public sphere, without fear of being expelled from their profession of choice or otherwise punished. Despite this victory, the equality agenda still poses a very real threat to Christian freedoms. As I mentioned at the outset of this presentation, equality law typically starts off with relatively humble goals, but then slowly expands into every sphere of our lives, including those that relate to the free exercise of our Christian faith and to how our children are educated. In Europe and in the UK, schools are legally obliged to respect the way that parents wish to raise their children in accordance with their Christian faith. However, with the introduction of the Equality Act in 2010, the Department of Education made it mandatory that the various protected characteristics, including sexual orientation and gender reassignment, should be promoted. Little guidance was provided to schools, but one thing was clear. The various educational bodies, locally and nationally, encourage schools to promote LGBT education. It has got to the point in the UK that the government has adopted new education regulations requiring schools at the secondary level to teach LGBTQI elements in all schools, including Christian schools, with no right of opt-out. Primary schools are also under heavy pressure to engage in LGBT issues. I think that many of us have had, historically, in the United Kingdom, an implicit trust in the education of our children by the state. Again, what I want to say to you in South Korea is keep your children safe. Understand what it is that they are being taught. If you don't want these programs in your schools, ensure that they don't ever enter your schools, that this does not become part of the curriculum. This needs to be a stated campaign aim of anything that you can do. You need to bring in the politicians, the educators, the pastors, the lawyers in order to ensure that this happens. Until recently, one of the chief executives of Ofsted, which is the the United Kingdom's official school inspectorate, was also one of the senior managers of Stonewall, which is the major LGBT lobby group in the United Kingdom. Stonewall is an LGBT organisation active in many spheres of culture, including politics and education. They are very clear about their campaigning goals, which are anti-ethical to biblical Christianity. They are equally clear that they feel Christianity must change and accept homosexuality as a virtue and condemn any Christian who does not. In fact, currently there is a movement in our nation to ban so-called conversion therapy. What does this mean? Well, actually telling someone that they can turn to Christ, they can give up their sexual behaviour, they can give that up, they can leave it at the foot of the cross. That, the sort of terms that we're hearing in Parliament and even in the church, is spiritual abuse for telling people that they can change. So this is something that you need to be very alive to. Spiritual abuse, conversion therapy, terrible terms which become used against Christians in order to make any explanation that we push back on not able to be heard by others. Government itself has become a cheerleader in this country for LGBT education. The partner of our current Prime Minister Boris Johnson, Carrie, was judging recently at the Conservative Party, at the Conservative Party's LGBT Fringe Conference Centre. She was judging drag karaoke. So the Conservative Party has become dominated, completely acquiescent to this particular agenda. If you were to enter the Department of Education building in Westminster, a stone's throw away from Parliament, you might be surprised to see that the only visible symbol in the main entrance is a large rainbow flag that decorates 2 floors of the building. I say this because your Department of Education, your Department of Health, your Department of Justice, you must ensure that they don't adopt this, that they don't feel that in the name of anti-discrimination they have to fly flags, that they have to introduce these policies. They need to be resisted from the outset. The Department of Education has rolled out new tags for their email signatures, including a rainbow flag with the slogan, "I am an LGBT plus champion," and direct them to the Stonewall website. The signature line ends with the following statement, I quote, "We cannot tell by looking at someone or by their name how they self-define their gender," and warning the reader to be sensitive to the use of gender-specific programs. This is our government. This is our government's education department. This is the education department that delivers education to children right down to 2 in our nursery schools. Given this, it's not surprising to hear stories like those of Izzy Montague and her experience at Heavers Farm School. Izzy and her husband Shane are Bible-believing Christians who wanted to raise their son Isaiah in accordance with their Christian beliefs. Izzy was troubled when she began seeing Stonewall posters popping up all over the school with slogans like, "I am gay, get over it." Her son was also coming home from school and telling her that he had to read storybooks about being gay. This all culminated in the school announcing that they would be holding a gay pride event at their school. The child in question was 6. Any parent who complained received a similar answer, which was that their children could not be opted out of LGBT education as it was mandated by law. Izzy formally complained to the school, noting that the school owed her a statutory duty to respect her right to raise her son in accordance with her Christian beliefs. When she went to meet the head teacher as part of the complaints procedure, she was greeted by the head teacher's daughter, who was taking notes at the meeting. The daughter, also a member of staff, wore a t-shirt with a conspicuous message written in bold black lettering saying, "Why be homophobic or transphobic when you can just be quiet?" The daughter also wore t-shirts to the primary school. One such t-shirt also read, "I am a lesbian." So teachers in the school of young children aged 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 are wearing t-shirts saying, "I'm a lesbian. Why be homophobic or transphobic when you can just be quiet?" Not surprisingly, a few weeks later, when Izzy received the official written response to her complaint from the head teacher, they absolved the school of any wrongdoing and defended the school's position of holding a pride event. While this wasn't surprising, what was indeed surprising was that on the same day that letter was sent out, that same teacher put Izzy's son, just a small boy, into a 4-hour detention. To be clear, Izzy's son had never shown any behavioural problems in school, nor had he ever served a detention. He was only, I said 6 years old, in fact he was only 5 years old, putting a 5-year-old into a 4-hour detention. Izzy was only told that evening that one of the teachers had physically handled him on his lower back. The next day, Izzy's son was again put into detention. Izzy, as any mother would, tried desperately to find out what happened, especially about the accusation of being physically manhandled. The school, in return, was awful to her. They provided no means or answers and ultimately barred Izzy from coming onto the school grounds. Izzy's story is becoming symbolic of the disdain equality and education activists have for the role of parents in educating their own children. I've been told by multiple school governors when handling complaints for other Christian parents that in their minds, parents are part of the problem and not the solution. They have told me that they have bypassed consulting parents on intimate and moral issues being taught in schools because they know that they will get pushback. So this begs the question as to what kind of response is that to genuine parental concerns when the law of the land requires parents to be consulted on these very questions. And it's why in South Korea what's very important that you ensure that the governance of your school remains Christian, remains, and you're keeping your children safe, and you're very invested in the curriculum for your children's school. This is a very, very important area to keep safe because, as you can see in the United Kingdom, it has been entirely queered. Our failure in the United Kingdom to understand where anti-discrimination leads has led to the systemic and systematic punishment of people with deeply held biblical beliefs. At the Christian Legal Centre last year, we gave advice to some 1,000 Christians who felt they'd suffered some level of detriment for their Christian faith. The Centre is currently supporting more than 50 court cases involving Christian freedoms that are live in court, that are active. These numbers are unacceptable for a nation that for so long identified with Christianity, one which has given birth to some of our most famous global evangelists, theologians and reformers. The other protected characteristic I would like to stress today, because it's also very damaging to both Christian freedoms and to the culture at large, is gender reassignment. Nigel and Sally Rowe are Christian parents who hold and wish to instill in their children a biblically centred belief in gender, beliefs that would include Genesis 1:27, where scripture says, "So God created man in his own image, in the image of God he created him, male and female he created them." Or Matthew 19:4, where Christ says, "Have you not read that he who created them from the beginning made them male and female?" In seeking to raise their children to the Christian beliefs, Nigel and Sally Rowe sent their two sons to a Church of England primary school on the Isle of Wight. Within 2 school years, both of their children, aged 6 and 8 at the time, found themselves in classes with boys who, under their parents and the school's direction, were going to school identifying as girls. Because of the confusion and discomfort suffered by their older son, Nigel and Sally Rowe took him out of school to be home educated. When the school informed Nigel and Sally Rowe of their plan to adopt a transgender affirming policy in the school, the reality was this: these small children, aged 6, 7, 8, in a small community, had known these other children, had known these little boys as boys. Now they were coming to school as girls. And if the other children didn't call these children by the right name or by the right pronoun, they would be in trouble. We had situations whereby the children were not going to toilet at school because they were getting so concerned about the use of toilets, this sort of thing in the school. Nigel and Sally attempted to work the matter out with the school in relation to their younger son. In a response to a letter they sent to the school, asking about anti-bullying measures and their own parental rights, the school responded by suggesting that anyone who could not believe that those little boys were girls or refused to give them female pronouns was transphobic. The school also announced their intention to educate parents and students alike in accordance with this gender ideology. Furthermore, the school and the education department was supported by the church, by the church's diocesan education body, in support of this gender ideology. So the church, a church school, capitulated to the state agenda, and the true Christian parents who were seeking to protect not just their children and others, they were punished as transphobic. The result is that now Nigel and Sally have been home educating their children for some 3 years, and litigation is about to commence imminently. Similarly, the Christian Legal Centre has supported an amazing maths teacher called Joshua Sutcliffe. He was sacked for saying "well done girls" to a group of girls in a maths class. The children were aged 15, but one of the girls identified as a boy. As a result of this, not immediately, but a week later, the parent of the child complained about Joshua Sutcliffe, and Joshua Sutcliffe was put into isolation as a maths teacher in the school every day. He was told to come in, prepare the lessons, and give them to a supply teacher. More recently, the Christian Legal Centre supported the Reverend John Parker, who was a governor of a Church of England school. He resigned because the school was aggressively pushing a trans agenda led by a radical transgender campaigning group called Mermaids. One of the children in the school was wanting to transition. The child was 8 or 9, and this John Parker raised issues about how this was going to be communicated to the children and to the parents, and raised issues over the mermaids coming into the school. For doing this, he was punished. He was pushed out. Did the Church of England Diocesan Education Authority stand with him? No. So again, the church punished him. Rather than going in a Church of England school, in a Christian school, and giving a Christian framework, which they could have done within the law, the church punished him. So this is my warning to South Korea. It's very subtle. Christians from the outset are made to look like people who are old-fashioned, fuddy-duddy, backward, irritable, irritating, nasty. The gay icon is made to look modern, beautiful, attractive, tolerant. But in fact, the LGBTQI agenda is deeply intolerant, and it absolutely punishes, it can't stand those that will not stand with it. And it does not care if parents are forced to take their children out of school. It does not care if a judge loses his job. It does not care. They want this. And the point is, for most, what also happens is that the church goes silent and everyone goes silent. So most people don't get punished because they're just silent. Those that dare to speak get punished, and that makes more people silent. I really hope and pray that South Korea will understand this and resist this. Transgender theory's impact has also been felt beyond our schools. The Christian Legal Centre is supporting Dr. David Makareth. He worked as a disability allowance assessor for the Department of Work and Pensions as a medical doctor. His employer presented him with a scenario about a transgender client expecting to be referred to in their chosen pronoun. And Dr. Makareth, as a medical doctor, said that he would not be able to call a biological man a woman or a biological woman a man because this has an impact on medicine, it has an impact on health. His comment led to disciplinary inquiries and further training by his employer, followed by a warning that he would be very likely to lose his job should he not comply with the transgender person's wish and refer to them by their gender pronoun. In the final email exchange with his employer, Dr. Makareth was instructed to follow the process as discussed in your training, or in the alternative, if however you do not want to do this, we will respect your decision and your right to leave your contract. To which Dr. Makareth replied, I am a Christian and in good conscience cannot do what the department is, again, the government department of work and pensions is requiring of me. So a government department in work and pensions is forcing a medical doctor to sign a medical document as a lie and is forcing him to lose his job. So Dr. Makareth felt coerced to leave his work and did so with great sadness in June of 2018. He was suspended from his duties during the same month, followed by a summary dismissal. He went on to say publicly, no doctor or researcher or philosopher can demonstrate or prove that a person can change sex. Without intellectual and moral integrity, medicine cannot function, and my 30 years as a doctor are now considered irrelevant compared to the risk that someone else might be offended. Please pray for Dr. Makareth as his case continues. We sincerely believe that the case will set an important principle and precedent for Christians in the United Kingdom. In bringing this talk to a conclusion, I'd just like to thank everyone for their deep desire to keep Korea safe from this type of cultural influence that we have had in the UK, which has led to a strong suppression of Christian exercise in every sphere of life. You are the frontline warriors for what is good and what is right and what is pleasing to God in your nation. In the United Kingdom, I do believe that we have lost our way. Views that show dissent from the sexual orthodoxy of the day are punished and shouted down. So we need people like you to learn from what has happened to us. People willing to stand up for the truth, no matter what the consequences, but people to understand what comes and to resist it from the outset. Do not be naive. Do not be naive. Do not, in fact, have the kind of the Christian naivety. Truth and grace, grace and truth. Understand from what has happened to us what will come, unless you resist, because it's your children. It's your children's lives that will be at stake. I thank you for taking a brave stand. I thank you for what you do. God bless South Korea.
네, 여러분 강의를 어떻게 보셨나요? 저 같은 경우에는 제가 안드레아의 그 영상을 그리고 또 강의를 많이 보았지만 한국에서 그 어느 때보다도 차별금지법을 제정하려는 시도가 제가 한참 진행 중일 때 안드레아의 그 말들이 더 마음에 울림으로 다가왔습니다. 특별히 안드레아 강의 중에서 안드레아가 영국이 이렇게 될 줄 누가 알았습니까? 하고 그렇게 호소하였는데 정말 저도 그런 생각이 들었습니다. 1870년에 우리에게 성경책을 던져주었던 토마스 선교사의 나라, 그리고 유명한 신학자와 성경학자들, 존 스타트, 마틴 로이드 존스, 데이비드 퍼슨 같은 정말 훌륭한 성경 교사와 신학자가 계셨던 그 나라가 지금은 성경적인 가치를 잃어버리고 안드레가 말한 것처럼 크리스천의 그러한 말할 권리조차, 기본 권리조차 보장되어지지 않아서 많은 사람들이 많은 영역에서 핍박을 받고 있는 이 현실. 제가 다시 들으면서 마음이 아프기도 하고 또 제 마음에 경종을 울리는 것 같습니다. 영국이 그렇게 되었다면 한국이라고 그렇게 되지 않는다는 보장이 없구나. 그렇기 때문에 특별히 안드레아가 말한 것처럼 이 재정의 시도가 있을 때 정신을 바짝 차리고, 그리고 그들은 처음에는 작은 것을 목표하지만 결국은 그들은 나라와 아이들과 전 모든 영역을 목표를 삼고 있다는 것을 우리가 기억하고서 참으로 정말 깨어나야 될 때가 아닌가 생각이 들었습니다. 정말 5, 6세 아이들에게 동성애를 가르쳐야 하고, 그리고 2세 어린이집부터 관장하고 있는 교육부에서 교육부의 홈페이지를 들어가고 이메일 서명에 들어가면 LGBT 플러스 챔피언, 결국은 LGBT자들은 승리자라고 말하는 메시지를 어릴 때부터 아이들에게 넣어준다면, 정말 그것을 생각하면 우리의 정말 다음 세대를 잃어버리는 일이 바로 눈앞에 다가와 있을 수 있겠구나. 우리가 아무리 기도하고 교회 안에서 아무리 우리가 열심히 봉사하고 예배하여도 우리가 이 차별법에 대해서 무심하다면 정말 우리가 생각하지 못한 재앙이 바로 우리의 식탁에, 우리의 자녀에, 그리고 우리의 교회와 사업처, 정말 이것이 다가올 수 있는 위협이구나 하는 생각이 들었습니다. 리차드 그 치안 판사라 할지라도 해임을 당하고, 그리고 상담가, 그리고 페북에다가 자기 의견을 올렸다고 해서 핍박을 받는 그러한 개개인의 그러한 모든 언론의 자유와 그리고 신앙을 표현하고 할 수 있는 모든 자유가 막혀버리는 정말 생각보다 무섭고 그리고 치열한 이게 싸움이겠구나 하는 생각이 들었습니다. 그래서 한국은 제발 깨어나십시오 하는 메시지가 그 어느 때보다 더 강하게 들려온 것 같은데요. 제가 사실은 이렇게 안드레아 얼굴을 보니까 우리 안드레아 변호사님 얼굴이 몇 년 사이에 보면 정말 이렇게 많은 싸움을 치르셨다는 것을 제가 느낄 수가 있습니다. 제가 한번 또 이렇게 개인적으로 이렇게 여쭤보기도 했는데 그때 하신 말씀이 있었습니다. 싸움이 갈수록 너무나 치열해지고 있다. 사실 안드레아는 영국 그 기독 법률센터와 그리고 크리스천 컨선을 본인이 그렇게 법률가로서 변호사로서 일하면서 또한 이 단체들을 이끌어가고 있는데요. 사실 이 단체는 개인이 자비랑 선교를 하면서 또 많은 분들의 호언에 동참으로 들어가고 있습니다. 근데 정말 감당해야 될 법률 업무와 그리고 도와줘야 될 분들, 여러 가지 행정 업무들이 많기 때문에 사실은 지난주에 제가 크리스천 컨선 가운데 재정적인 도움이 긴급하게 필요하다는 이메일을 받기도 했습니다. 사실 안드레아 윌리엄스와 크리스천 컨선은 한국이 지금 현재 겪고 있는 일을 먼저 겪었기 때문에 그들에게는 정말 지혜와 우리에게 던져주는 메시지가 있습니다. 그리고 그 경험으로부터 나온 저에게 전달해주는 그러한 지혜와 노하우가 있는데요. 그래서 어려울 때마다 저희가 물어보기도 하고 또 자문을 얻기도 하기도 합니다. 그래서 많은 부분에서 굉장히 많은 빚을 졌다고 생각이 듭니다. 우리가 미국이나 영국 같은 그런 나라들의 복음의 빚을 지기도 하였지만 어떻게 보면 1900년대 그렇게 지었지만 현재 이 2000년대를 살아가는 우리들은 바로 거룩한 나라, 그리고 하나님의 부르심을 일궈내고 성취하는 나라로 세워지기 위해서 참으로 차별법을 막는 일이 너무나 중요한데 이 일에 안드레아와 그리고 크리스천 컨슨이 저에게 정말 많은 도움이 되었습니다. 그래서 이번에는 저희가 이 진 빚을 한번 어떻게 조금 감사함으로 표현하고 어려울 때 우리가 힘이 되어줄 수 있으면 좋겠다는 마음이 드는데요. 여러분들 그런 감동이 드시는 분들, 크리스천 컨선 그 영어를 이해하시고 아시는 분들은 크리스천 컨선 홈페이지에 들어가면 Donate Now 해서 후원 신청하는 그러한 페이지가 있습니다. 거기를 클릭하셔도 괜찮고요. 송금하는 문제나 그리고 영어 때문에 조금 이해가 어렵다 하시는 분들은 저희 차바아가 함께 이 일에 동참하고 돕도록 하겠습니다. 여러분들이 차바아 그 유튜브 영상에 유튜브를 보면은 그 아래 하단에 설명이 있는데요. 거기 보면 차바아 후원 계좌가 나와 있습니다. 그 계좌에다가 마음에 이 영국의 진 빚을 크리스천 컨슨과 그리고 우리가 안드레아 윌리엄스에게 진 빚을 감사함으로 조금이나마 표현하며 그들에게 또 힘이 되어지기를 원하신다면 저희 그 차바아 계좌로 여러분들이 헌금으로 동참해 주시고 근데 계좌 이체를 해주실 때 거기 뒤에다가 영국이라고 적어주십시오. 그러면 저희가 이 헌금을 함께 모아서 영국 크리스천 컨슨에게 전달하도록 하겠습니다. 그래서 우리가 말로만 감사한 것이 아니라 우리가 진정으로 그 감사함을 표현할 때 하나님께서 우리에게 더 축복하여 주시고 또한 정말 우리에게 We are not alone in this. 이 싸움은 우리 혼자 싸우는 것이 아니라 이 글로벌한 세계 가운데 악의 무리들이 일어나고 있다면 정말 거룩한 성도들의 무리와 하나님의 진리를 나에게 해가 올지라도 말로 표현하고 지켜내고 행실로 지켜냄으로써 우리의 자녀들을 지켜내고 정말 이 나라 가운데 뜻이 하늘에서 이루어진 것처럼 땅에서도 이루어지는 하나님 그것을 보기를 원하나이다. 우리가 기도하는 마음으로 함께 동참하기를 원합니다. 그래서 여러분 함께 꼭 동참해 주시고요. 또 한 가지는 또 영국에서는 크리스천 컨선 주관으로 1년에 한 번씩 물버퍼스 아카데미가 열립니다. 그것도 다 전 세계에서 법조인이라든가 그리고 목회자라든가 근데 이제 영어가 되시는 분들은 또 함께 거기에 관심을 두고 크리스천 컨선 페이지에 보시고 동참하셔도 좋겠는데요. 캠브리지 대학에서 매년마다 이 현재 일어나고 있는 이러한 세상 가운데 성경을 위협하는 그러한 가치들에 대해서 우리가 어떻게 준비하고 배우고 싸워야 될 것인지를 우리에게 훈련해 줍니다. 저와 그리고 또 젊은 청년들 그리고 또 많은 분들 또 함께 동참할 수 있었는데요. 가보시면 정말 저희에게 숙박과 그리고 또 맛있는 그 음식들을 제공해 주면서 정말 너무나 제너러스하게 풍성하게 저에게 후원해 줍니다. 그래서 많은 곳에 각 세계 가운데 이렇게 하나님의 진리를 수호하며 싸워내는 하나님의 빛의 군사, 다음 세대 영적 군사들을 길러내는 데 수고하고 있는데요. 그렇기 때문에 꼭 우리가 함께 크리스천 컨선에 후원하는데 이번 기회에 동참했으면 좋겠습니다. 감동되시는 분들 이번 주와 다음 주 꼭 함께 동참해 주시고 또한 더 궁금하신 사항은 문의해 주시면 감사하겠습니다. 자, 그러면 이번 시간에는 우리 이프 패밀리의 영상을 함께 3분짜리 영상 보도록 하겠는데요. 여러분 또 차바아 그 동영상 페이지에 가보시면 그 아랫부분에 보시면은 차바아 채널 아래에 이프 패밀리라는 그런 가상 드라마의 영상들이 업로드 되어져 있습니다. 윤학열 감독님이 함께 하시는 마하나임 TV 선교회에서 주관하여서 또 우리 또 어떤 그 연예인분들이 또 함께 동참해 주시고 해서 차별금지법이 제정되었을 때 일어날 일들을 이해하기 쉽도록 그것을 영상으로 만들어 주셨는데요. 들어가셔서 마하나임 TV 선교회 여러분들 후원해 주시고 또 기도도 해 주시고요. 그리고 이프 패밀리 영상에 여러분 구독해 주시기를 바랍니다. 또한 이 이프 패밀리는 3분에서 5분짜리 아주 편안하게 쉽게 볼 수 있는 영상이기 때문에 이것을 교회에서 여러분들이 함께 매주마다 이렇게 상영 영상을 재생해서 보시면은 더 우리가 차별금지법에 대해서 배우는 기회가 되지 않을까 생각합니다. 그러면 우선 저희 3분짜리 티저 영상을 함께 보도록 하겠습니다.
엄마가 나 미워하니까 인권이 다 고발해버릴 거예요.
뭐라고? 동성애 반대 설교는 법 위반이 아니라고 했어요.
자녀에게 100억 원의 배상금을 지급합니다.
아,
잘 자랐을 거야. 차별금지법의 개정을 막아 우리 아이들의 마음을 지켜주십시오.
깨어나 외치지 않으시면 다 잃고 말 것입니다.
아이들은 굉장히 심각한 기독교 세계관의 침해를 겪게 됩니다.
차별금지법 제정을 막아 우리 아이들의 마음을 지켜주십시오.
캐나다에서는 데이비드 린 목사가 동성애자들에게 폭행당한 뒤 영국 토니 미아노 목사도 경찰에 체포됐습니다. 스웨덴에서는 동성애는 죄라고 설교를 했던 아케 그린 목사가 징역 1개월을 선고받았습니다.
차별금지법이 통과된 외국에서
반동성애 설교자가 체포되고 구금되었으며 형사처벌을 받기까지 했습니다.
우리나라의 정의당이 발의한 법안은 해당 안 됩니다. 단 제보자 불이익을 좁혀놓았죠.
동성애는 성경의 말씀대로 죄악입니다.
전 신대원을 졸업한 동성애자 강도사입니다. 목사고시 지원하겠습니다.
교회법에 따라 준호하겠습니다. 전 지지하겠습니다. 박장님도 교회법에 따라 실명합니다.
우리가 이대로 가만히 있을 줄 아십니까? 정신적 고통!
의회선과 오역, 용해와 목사를 고발합니다.
동성애자나 동성애 지지자를 교회법으로 치리하는 일로 처벌받습니다.
적대적, 모욕적 환경 조성 제3조 제1항 제4호 명예훼손죄 확대 적용이 가능합니다. 이 법이 통과되고 제정된다면 확대 적용은 일사천리입니다. 법 개정은 너무나 손쉬운 일입니다.
결국은 판사의 판결에 달린 사안이기에 아무런 문제가 없을 것이란 말은 절대 지켜줄 수 없고 책임질 수도 없는 주장입니다.
교회와 교단, 개인에게 천문학적인 손해배상 위험을 안길 수가 있습니다. 따라서 우리는 반드시 이 법안의 통과를 제정을 반대해야 하겠습니다.
차별금지법 바로 알아야 합니다.
네, 영상을 보면서 제 마음 가운데 너무 감사한 마음이 들었습니다. 차바가 처음에는 이게 어떻게 잘 진행이 될까 찾기 시작했는데 갈수록 정말 하나님께서 축복해 주셔서 각 영역에서 전문가들이 함께 해 주셔서 우리에게 각 영역에서 이것을 위해서 함께하며 싸우는 동지가 있다는 것들이 너무나 감사하고요. 제 마음에 감동이 일어납니다. 그래서 정말 우리가 함께 이것을 잘 막아내고 대한민국의 정말 부르심을 이뤄내는 그런 시간이 되기를 바랍니다. 이 시간에는 인권 보도 준칙에 대해서 우리 조영규 변호사님이 광고해 주시겠는데요. 사실 조영규 변호사님이 차바의 행정 담당으로 정말 많은 수고를 해주고 계십니다. 그래서 너무나 감사한데 우리 변호사님 나오셔서 있을 인권 보도 준칙 세미나에 대해서 광고해 주시겠습니다.
네, 여러분 안녕하세요. 네, 오늘 진행 우리 김윤숙 목사님 너무 잘해 주시죠? 우리 김윤숙 목사님께서 우리 안드레 윌리엄스 이번에 강사 섭외하는 과정을 전 과정을 또 섬겨 주셨습니다. 그리고 안드레 윌리엄스는 지금 제가 운영하는 윌버퍼스 아카데미에 2016년에 좀 다녀왔고요. 다녀오면서 거기서 일주일 정도 아카데미 강의를 들으면서 한국에도 차별금지법을 막기 위한 아카데미를 해야 되겠다라는 권면도 받고 또 많은 영감도 얻어온 그런 곳입니다. 그 후 저희 한국 팀들이 계속해서 안드레 윌리엄스 윌버퍼스 아카데미를 좀 다녀왔는데요. 우리 김민수 목사님도 좀 다녀오시고 또 그래서 2017년에 동성애 대체 아카데미 할 때 우리 안드레아 윌리엄스가 와서 강의를 좀 해주시고 갔고, 또 그 해에 생가요 국제 페스티벌이라고 해서 세계 각국의 동성애 운동가들을 초청해서 한국에서 반동성애 국제 연대 활동을 할 때 그때 또 한 번 이렇게 한국을 위해서 또 방문을 해주셨습니다. 그래서 안드레아는 무엇보다도 한국에 대해서 각별하게 한국은 꼭 막아낼 수 있기를 권면하는 이런 말씀을 많이 주셨고, 또 한국 팀들에 대해서 굉장히 많은 섬김을 해주셨습니다. 아마 오늘 강의도 여러분 제가 보기에는 차별금지법에 관한 여러 강의를 들었는데 차별금지법에 초점을 맞춘 안드레아 강의는 이번이 처음입니다. 아마 메시지를 잘 들으시면 알겠지만 저희 차별금지법 바로알기 아카데미에서 제공하는 그런 메시지하고 아주 정확하고, 또 영국에서 일어난 생생한 사례들을 거의 가짜의 그 의심, 논쟁할 여지 없이 정확한 팩트들을 여러분에게 제공해 드리고 있으며, 특별히 우리가 교육 영역을 막아낼 문제에 대해서 정확하게 말씀해 주고 계십니다. 기회가 되신다면 여러 번 좀 시청해 주시고, 또 관련 분야에 종사하시는 분들은 좀 도전받아서 한국에서 이 차별금지법을 막아내는 일에 적극 동참해 주시기를 호소드리고, 우리 김현승 목사님 말씀해 주신 것처럼 한국을 위해서 그렇게 많이 섬기는 크리스찬 칸선이 저희가 또 그동안 받은 은혜나 도움에 대해서 이번 기회에 한번 저희가 영국을 좀 돕는 그런 기도와 재정적인 동참이 있었으면 좋겠다, 이런 말씀 드리고 싶습니다. 오늘 제가 좀 강구하러 나온 것은 인권보도준칙에 대한 그 복음법률가의 세미나를 소개해드리기 위해서 왔습니다. 여러분, 인권보도준칙은 2011년도에 제정된 것인데요. 기자협회하고 국가인권위원회가 만든 것인데 언론 분야의 포괄적 차별금지법입니다. 그래서 이 준칙의 8장에 성소수자 인권 조항이 있는데, 동성애에 대해서 잘못됐다라는 취지의 보도를 못하게 되어 있습니다. 그러니까 동성애에 대해서 또는 성전환에 대해서 부정적인 관점을 표현하는 자체가 메이저 언론에서 보도 못하도록 하는 굉장히 언론 자유를 침해하는 조항이 되어 있고, 또 동성애를 또 성전환을 치유 대상이나 질환, 그리고 특히 에이즈와 같은 질병과 연관시키지 못하도록, 실제로 연관되어 있는데 연관되었다는 의학적 지식을 보도하지 못하도록 되어 있는 헌법상 보장된 언론의 자유와 국민의 알 권리를 사실상 동성애와 성전환에 대해서 박탈하는 무서운, 사실은 언론 재갈법입니다. 이 법에 대해서 아직 한 번도 비판적 토론회가 열리지 않았었는데, 복음법률가회에서 준비하고 또 언론의 자유를 회복하기 위한 교회 내 언론인들이 모여서 복음언론인의 창립준비위원회를 만들어서 한 3개월간 준비를 했습니다. 그래서 두 기관이 주최를 합니다. 복음언론인회, 그 다음에 복음언론인의 창립준비위원회. 그리고 발제를 총 6명이 하고 토론도 6명이 합니다. 전부 언론인 반, 그 다음에 법률가 반, 그리고 관련 의료 전문가들이 골고루 있어서 인권보도준칙 그동안 한국의 언론의 자유를 동성애와 성전환에 대해서 얼마나 심각하게 박탈해서 실제로는 한국 내에 얼마나 국민의 올바른 분별력과 판단력을 침해하고, 그리고 실제로는 에이즈와 여러 가지 동성애 관련 질병의 폭증을 유발하는 언론계의 제도 역할을 해왔는지 우리가 조금은 드러내는, 국민 앞에 드러내는 토론회를 합니다. 날짜를 알려드리겠습니다. 다음 주 8일 화요일입니다. 프레스센터 19층에서 합니다. 직접 특히 언론인분들께서 관심 가져주시고 동참해 주시기를 호소드리고요. 저희 차바와 이런 관련 방송에서는 이 세미나도 실시간으로 여러분에게 스트리밍 해드리도록 하겠습니다. 관심 있는 분들 적극 동참해 주시기를 호소드립니다. 여러분 고맙습니다.
네, 감사합니다. 많은 분들의 동참을 부탁드리겠고요. 다음 시간에는 원래는 그 AGF의 제프리 벤틀러가 저희가 강의해 주시기로 했으나 그거를 한 주 연기하도록 하겠고요. 대신에 그 하와이 강약교회에서 섬기고 계신 우리 한명동 목사님의 강의를 저희가 듣도록 하겠습니다. 하와이 강약교회는 하와이에서 동성애를 반대해서 교회 건물에서 나와서 정말 광야에서 예배를 드리고 있는 교회인데요. 목사님의 강의를 통해서 현재 미국의 그 차급법으로 인한 폐해와 그리고 복음의 순수성을 지켜내기 위해서 정말 삶의 현장에서 그리고 정말 목회 현장에서 수고하고 계시는 분들의 이야기를 우리가 생생하게 들을 수 있을 것 같습니다. 그래서 여러분 함께 다음 시간에도 함께 동참해 주시고 많이 지지해 주시기 바랍니다. 오늘 또 유튜브 실시간 채팅창에 많은 분들이 의견을 보내주시고 함께 동참해 주셨는데요. 다 읽어드릴 수 없어서 몇 가지만 한번 읽어보도록 하겠습니다. 시간이 별로 없는 것 같다. 다음 세대가 진리를 진리로 말할 수 있도록 지금 지켜내자. 이렇게 말씀해 주셨고요. 또 독일에 살았던 어느 성도분께서는 이렇게 말씀해 주셨습니다. 교회가 진리를 대적하는 것을 막아내지 못하면 영국과 유럽처럼 다 무너지는 것을 빨리 알아야겠습니다. 잠시나마 독일서 살아본 사람으로서 정말 가슴이 답답합니다. 라고 전해주셨습니다. 그리고 또 한 분은 탁월한 안드레아 변호사님 강의 감사합니다. 가슴은 뜨겁게 머리는 냉철하게 행함은 신속히 하자는 댓글을 올려주셨습니다. 여러분들 이렇게 후원해주시고 지지해주시고 이렇게 함께해주셔서 참으로 감사합니다. 혼자는 싸울 수 없지만 정말 우리가 외국에서도 우리를 응원하듯이 이 세상 가운데 정말 여호와를 아는 것이 온 땅에 가득하고 그 진리를 우리가 지켜낼 수 있도록 거룩한 주의 군사의 무리들이 정말 각지에서 그리고 각 영역에서 그리고 이 땅의 각 나라들에서 정말 일어나기를 고대합니다. 그래서 사실 강의 듣기가 쉽지 않을 수 있겠지만 우리가 알면 더 힘이 생기는 것 같습니다. 약을 먹을 때도 비타민을 알고 먹으면 더 효능이 있는 것 같습니다. 우리가 작은 법도 잘 배워서 잘 막아서 우리 다음 세대를 위해서 우리가 정말 열심히 그리고 기도로서 잘 막아내고 싸워낼 수 있었으면 좋겠습니다. 그러면 다음 시간 강의를 기도해 주시고요. 제가 마무리 기도하고 마치도록 하겠습니다. 함께 기도하시겠습니다. 하나님 작고 하나님 가난했던 이 나라 이 민족 가운데 하나님 복음을 전달해 주시고 하나님 오늘 우리가 누리는 이러한 풍요와 하나님 이러한 안정과 이러한 행복이 있게 하셨음을 감사합니다. 하나님 우리에게 주신 지난날의 은혜를 잊어버리지 아니하고 하나님께서 우리에게 선하시고 우리를 대변하시고 우리의 응답하신 것처럼 하나님 이 땅 가운데서 하나님의 진리와 아버지가 세워놓으신 진리를 위협하며 무너뜨리려는 하나님 정말 그러한 무리들이 하나님 그러한 소리들이 이 땅에 가득 차고 있습니다. 하나님 그러나 이때 우리가 침묵하지 않게 하여 주시옵소서. 하나님 우리에게 목소리를 낼 수 있는 지혜와 담대함을 더하여 주시고 하나님 많은 서구교회는 무너졌지만 하나님 대한민국 교회는 연합하여서 하나님 교회뿐 아니라 각 영역 가운데 각 세대 가운데 각 전문가들이 하나님 우리가 연합하여서 하나님 거룩한 방파제를 이룰 수 있도록 우리에게 힘을 더하여 주옵소서. 하나님 이 차별금지법 아카데미가 바로알기 아카데미가 있게 하심을 감사합니다. 주님 뒤에서 수고하시는 한 분 한 분을 주님께서 힘을 더하여 주시고 기름 부어주시고 하나님 매주 강의 가운데 강사분들을 주님께서 기름 부어주시고 하나님 이 방송이 흘러나갈 때 우리의 마음 가운데 하나님 거룩한 나라를 하나님의 나라를 위하여서 그리고 우리의 다음 세대를 위해서 지켜내고자 하는 마음의 열정과 하나님 그리고 행동하는 우리의 신앙이 있게 하여 주시옵소서. 아버지 이 모든 것들이 있게 하심을 감사하며 우리는 미약하오나 친히 여호와의 군대가 앞서가시고 이를 일구어 주시고 그리하여 정말 이 싸움에 하나님 우리가 하나님이 원하실 때까지 승리할 수 있도록 주여 은혜를 베풀어 주옵소서. 오늘도 함께한 한 분 한 분을 하나님 그분들의 가정을 축복하여 주시고 다음 주에 올 때까지도 주의 평안과 사랑으로 하나님 성령 충만으로 지켜주시고 이 나라를 주의 은혜와 은총으로 지켜주시옵소서. 감사드리오며 살아계신 우리 주 예수 그리스도의 이름으로 기도하였습니다. 감사합니다. 여러분, 그럼 다음 주에 뵙도록 하겠습니다.